Now, the insights of Jay Martin on our world. Society and politics. The Jay Martin interview. So here we are, the first time I spoke to you in 2021, and things are, still quite bleak, aren't they? Obviously, 2020 isn't the end of it, so there was no point celebrating the end of it. So I'm welcoming James Martin on. So there's a couple of things really. One is that restrictions have got tougher again in France, and that you're in France, so you can tell us about that. But also the situation with Brexit and the lorries that have just before the festive season they were queuing up in a massive lorry park, which they tried to say was far less lorries, but actually because of the age of the internet and smartphones, it was able to be proved that it was far more lorries than they said. So I don't know why they even tried to hide those figures. So what are the new restrictions that have come in France then now?
Well, firstly, Happy New Year to everyone, and it's good to be back. France is back in new lockdown, in new restrictions, with essentially the removal of the. The last time I spoke to the show, I'd explained that you needed some bits of paper to leave your house. Well, they were removed, and what we have now is essentially a national curfew in place. So where I am at the moment, still very much locked down. Effectively, for me, it's nearly a year entirely since I was in lockdown in Britain, and again in France. I was hoping to have been back to the UK, but the lockdown now is a national curfew between 8 o'clock and 8 o'clock, of which the police, there's a marked increase of police or gendarme presence enforcing the curfew. If you're in some regions in France where COVID appears to be much more prevalent, namely in the east of the country, that curfew is from 6 p.m. till 6 a.m. So they're the increased lockdown measures in France.
So yeah, I was just speaking to a relative as well. She said that if you go to, say, a friend's house after and are there after 6 or 8 p.m. in that case, you have to stay overnight because you could be nabbed on the way back.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, you were just explaining before the show about, I think you said that the friend relative is in Strasbourg. Well, of course, that's in the east of the country where, yeah, if you're caught out after 6 o'clock, well, it's one of those cases, wherever you fall, there shall you be buried. That's it. If you're stuck at someone's house, as has very nearly happened during the festive period, where people have perhaps had a few orange juices too many, and it's approaching 8 o'clock. It's tough. It's time you've got to you've got to stop over essentially. So yes, but to be fair, what we are seeing in France is, whilst the COVID figures were at one point at a peak of it was about 90,000, 86,000, 87,000 cases back in November. The cases as today, figures will be updated later on, but I should say as of yesterday were 12,500, 12,489. So the numbers of cases has dramatically dropped, albeit there are some signs now that there is a steady increase. We're just waiting to see the figures. So today in France there is the National Security Council, what in the UK would be known as COBRA. COBRA, just for those pub quiz goers, is Cabinet Office Briefing Room, and then it's called COBRA because it's Briefing Room A. what we would call Cobra meeting of joint heads, chiefs, and all of that, discussing national security, health matters, etc. The Security Council here in France is meeting today. Now, it's not certain whether there are going to be tighter restrictions in France, because here there isn't what we're seeing in the UK, which is a parabolic increase in the number of cases. So I don't like doing shows where it can be dated too well. But if you have a look at 58,000 cases on the 2nd of January, 55,000 on the 3rd of January, no signs of abating just yet. There isn't a need in France to go into a national lockdown, as has just been announced in Scotland, for example, where there will be a full national lockdown. What happens in the UK is, in England, I should say, is going to be interesting. These bubbles, which I struggle to get my head around sometimes, seem not to be working. This is very little to do with the so-called new strain of the virus. To be fair, that's plaguing the southeast of the country, but I think that, I just want to tell you a little anecdote from around about 10 minutes ago, where I was speaking to someone in a large nuclear site. I can't mention which one, but go figure. If you know me, you'll know where I'm on about. Where several employers have said, you'll be in one bubble on the coach into the site, and then you'll be working in other bubbles. It's a total breach of the legislation, but it's no surprise that place is now a COVID hotspot, which is most likely now going to have to go into a form of lockdown itself tomorrow, on the basis that the two infirmaries, the two hospitals near to that site, do not have any more ICU beds and cannot take any more cases. So whether there's incidents minor or major, they are swamped. They can't take any more. And that really is the problem that we've got with COVID. Just one more thing, if I might. The issue with lockdown is generally due to not just restricting the contagion, if you will, but actually has a lot to do with the fact that after 10 years of the NHS being ran down and privatised and sold off, it kept the logo, brought profits to Virgin and Circa and all these other people. We don't have the capacity anymore. It's nothing to do with the NHS. It's to do with these private companies and the fact that the Tories have been cutting and cutting and cutting. I just wanted to make that very clear, because there are now talks, I understand, in the past couple of days, around briefing notes to sell it off once and for all.
So even during the time of where it's being used heavily, you'd think this would be the situation that would rescue the NHS in a way, because it would show the need for it or something like that. So in France, you've got almost a national lockdown again by the curfew, because you couldn't get anywhere to any significant distance. You'd have to get back if they've scrapped the 1 kilometre anyway. The 1 kilometre away from home idea that they seem to have beforehand, unless that's still the case as well.
Yeah, you have. I mean, I've just generalised the restrictions here in France. The most significant one is to do with the word curfew. What's called confinement or lockdown. Essentially, those were lifted in place of this curfew. So um, like I say, you don't need the exemption certificate, but there are some restrictions on travel. So, for example, if you're in some parts trying to travel between different regions or departments, I should say, the departments again are just like counties. The travel is still restricted in that way, but there are some other issues as well. So, for example, the main issue is the minute, I know we'll be coming on to this, but if you're trying to get into France from the UK, for example, that's going to be a problem unless you have a valid reason for travel. There's a limited reason for travel if you're returning back home, for example, but you must have a COVID clean certificate. So you must undertake some. You must have been tested, if that makes sense.
I think that would work, actually, because once you've got a negative test, you should be able to do certain things for a while, I suppose. Well, I suppose it's a bit like the tiers here that they've got, so that, that it seems to be based roughly on counties, so there isn't even a part of the UK that isn't in one of the lower tiers except for the Isles of Scilly now. So tier 1, I think, it might be
Yes.
the Isles of Scilly. There's nowhere left in tier 2 at all, and then everywhere else is either 3 or 4. And unfortunately, South Wirral is 4 now. Which means that international travel is not permitted. They say you shouldn't go between each tier, but there's no actual border checks as such. But they might pick up that you're from another area if you get police attention. Perhaps, I don't know. But it's still feeling very restricted. And the question,
on the Isles of Scilly, I'm not sure
that's the case now.
Yeah, just on the Isles of Scilly. Just on the Isles of Scilly, I'm not sure that there's going to be. It's going to remain in, I think it's tier 2 for too much longer, because I do a lot of work with the airlines, and the airlines are saying that you've got a load of people travelling from regional airports and all of this over to Scilly because they can just get away. Just coming back to France, so the lockdown was removed and the curfew introduced, but just to be clear, that there was a 3-step or 3-stage plan for leaving even the curfew. And the idea was that businesses could reopen essentially, I think it was the 28th of November, but you then couldn't. There was some restrictions on travel. By the 15th of December, it was enabled that you could travel between different regions if you weren't in one of the higher tiers. You didn't need an attestation, in other words, a bit of paper saying that you could, you could leave. There was then talk. I think it's the 7th of January. The idea was the cinemas, theatres, museums, things like that would then reopen, and then by January the 20th, bars, restaurants, gyms would reopen. From what I understand today, that most certainly isn't going to be the case. There won't be any relaxation on the opening of some forms of industry for some time.
Well, it's just, I suppose it's mostly got worse, hasn't it, really? We had this little brief window over Christmas that was going to be open, so it was going to be the 23rd to 27th or 28th of December or something, and then they only significantly relaxed any restrictions for Christmas Day, actually. And they even relaxed it in Wales for that. So, so now the other thing that's happened alongside this, and actually what was strange is if you were sick of hearing about Brexit, it gave a slight break in the news from hearing about the virus all the time, when it got mentioned again because of the situation that was unfolding in Dover. So what we could do is for anyone wondering why that would happen, why would there be a huge queue of lorries in Dover? Now, of course, it was actually to do with the virus restrictions as well at first, and not so much Brexit. But maybe it was a combination of the two in a way, because of the rights that we would have had for free travel of trade were coming to an end. So what essentially caused the first that huge queue of lorries that we saw in sort of near Dover just before Christmas, which, as you said, is very festive. Indeed, it set the festive vibe up itself, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. I mean, what happened with the lorries was relatively, well, I was going to say it was relatively unique, but actually it had a little more to do with
so we've lost the audio, or we occasionally keep.
I've got you back. I keep on losing you there, Michael.
Ah, right, yes. Oh, maybe it decides to do it when I turn mine down, because I've got the technology to turn mine down while you speak. You see, especially with what we've got running in here. Oh yes, so we'll start. Yeah, we'll start again with that. With the why would that situation occur in the first place?
Yeah, so I was going to say it was unique. Actually, I think it gave a taste of things to come. So you had essentially two things unfolding. You had the increase in the number of traffic due to Christmas, New Year. So I'm not just on about people travelling to get away on holiday or anything like that. What I'm referring to is the traffic from hauliers. They were, and always do every Christmas, you'll find that it is very busy at Dover and some of the other ports. We import most of our, not just foodstuffs, but most of our Christmas presents. And as such, the general increase in traffic. Now, what then happened was the French government had heard Boris Johnson and some of his ministers talking about how dangerous this new sort of London strain, if you will, this UK strain of the of COVID, that this was potentially more damaging to health, and it was spreading, and it was spreading quicker. It could infect quicker. And as such, the French government said, well, we need to seal the borders. A move that wasn't lost on me. It seemed that France, as a member of the EU, managed to control its border. Something that Brexiteers had been talking about was impossible to do. So the 2 days that France sealed its border, essentially, and as did a lot of other countries, and they still have their borders sealed, the knockback on top of the Christmas traffic meant that nothing was coming through, but lorries were still arriving at the ports with perishable goods and what have you, that essentially were spoiling and that. So the tailbacks were a flavour of things to come, because where we are now, Britain has not just left the EU, it's left the customs union and has a free trade arrangement. But hauliers, today's day one really of normal transport, and hauliers are going to have to make sure that bits of paper are filled in, as well as having to undertake COVID checks. So I think that those tailbacks will be back, if you will, and I think they'll be back soon.
Well, could you see a situation also that where even though they sort of cleared it, managed, and well, there was as you say, there was a thing between the UK and France about France decided to close the borders, so just literally so that no one could move, and then something had to be sorted out because of this. Because of this traffic, because we need it for deliveries. Could you see a lot of people who work for hauliers or haulage companies maybe saying that they're not going to bother with the UK anymore? It's just too much hassle to do that, and restrict themselves to only having the haulage business for the EU countries. Could you?
Well,
So,
they already have. They already have. I can speak personally. So, one thing just to mention is what a sorry state of affairs that whole lorry gate, if you want to call it that, was. The idea that a country as rich as the UK is, as we're constantly told, they couldn't feed, water, just give some basic amenities to lorry drivers. In fact, some pretty disgusting comments. I just want to make a special thank you to the Sikh community who voluntarily were putting together some basic meals for those drivers who were left in squalid conditions. It took days before the UK even thought to put some military assistance in. What an absolute savage indictment of this government. To answer your question directly, we're already there. There are some items that I get from the UK that. Some items from eBay, for example, or some direct. In France, you can't get any, oddly enough, Danish bacon. That sounds unusual, Denmark being in the EU, but mostly it comes from the UK. One cooperative farm that I use have said that they're not because of the situation at Dover and because of Brexit, they cannot supply France. Now, I was also looking at potentially getting a new computer or something like that from the UK. Again, same from every company that formerly did international deliveries, now saying because of Brexit. They're not saying it's because of COVID. They're saying it's because of Brexit. So it's already started, and I do know the same is vice versa for some people trying to import things from the EU, where companies have just said, no, we're not bothering.
so that's gonna have a bit of an impact, isn't it? It's hard to know exactly what though. But there were worries over the fresh food situation. Is that still a crisis, or have they managed to work something out? Saying that a lot of fresh food actually comes from the continent into the UK then. So how are the supply lines now in January? As you said, you're not able to easily get things from the UK into France. But what's happening the other way around?
Well, again, the supply chains, I'm not going to give you an economist answer for it, but as much as I would like to. The supply chains are shot. Now, it takes 10, 20 years for supply chains, for trade networks to begin to establish themselves and to develop. We don't know on the 4th of January, as it is at time of recording right now, we don't know and we won't know for a few years yet, the full impact of the collapse and destruction of the supply chains and the impact of Brexit. And the reason we won't know that is because a lot of companies have stockpiled and all of this market. But what I will say this very clearly. We do a lot of work within the trade union movement with supermarkets, and I speak to a lot of reps in supermarkets and things like distribution. I'm just thinking of one area not too far away from you at Rainhill, where essentially what they're saying is that because of the problems with getting things through and onto ferries and into the Channel Tunnel, because of tailbacks and because of the need for paperwork and the delays, that when you're looking at perishable goods, there is going to be essentially a shock to existing supply chains. What they've said is that anything that's really perishable perhaps won't be able to get into the UK And as such, they believe that the amount of items on the supermarket shelf will remain relatively stable, but the variety will dramatically decrease.
But obviously, it's not. But it's not as bad as obviously, running out of the normal food that we need. Just a lack of variety, because a lot of things can be done within this country, can't they? But we also enjoyed all the importing of different things, and then when you go out from food, it's all the various things that you might order from abroad as well. So what about if you're just ordering things that are from China or America? Is that going to be just about the same?
Well, here's the issue. So I was just going to come on to a really interesting point from a few businesses who have said that when they've putting purchases from, in this example, there were two items, bulk items for onward sale that were coming from China. The rest are actually bananas. If you must know. And the problem was the existing supply chain isn't to the UK. What happens is they arrive sort of next day in one instance, but from China it takes a little bit longer. But they arrive in Germany and are then sorted out by DPD and then travel onwards to the UK, or at least that's what used to happen. Well, the delivery companies can't guarantee next day, 24 hours or just in time anymore. And as such, they're saying, it could be 2 to 3 days. Now, if you have a business that relies upon, keeping fruit and veg fresh, or selling of things like refrigeration,
so just
and they're going from China into Germany and all of that.
Yeah, we just had a drop out there with what you said. What was it?
The next day.
Something like refrigerators or something. I can't remember. There was a dropout just as you said that after the banana example. Or the fruit and veg example, rather.
I was just saying that refrigeration... it was the small parts. The next day economy, if you will, is severely disrupted. So that has a shockwave across the rest of the economy. You might... a fridge might need to be repaired, for example, and previously it's been, we can do it in 24 hours. Well, that could have a knock-on effect then for 2 or 3 days. Doesn't have the refrigeration capacity anymore. So there's lots of issues like that. The true effects we don't know. If you ask any economist to give you a prediction, you might as well read a horoscope. Yeah. But my sense is that really going to be significant, but covered up by COVID.
Well, I suppose it is quite a handy way of covering it up. Actually, you can just say, "Oh, well, that's the reason for these effects. Is everything's had to slow down through that. If we could have saw it without this virus crisis going on, then you would have saw exactly how it was. But it sounds like most things are just going to slow down, but it's particularly bad for some things that need to be faster. So obviously, yeah.
For example, I've just spoke about food. Tell me how the UK's insulin supplies are.
I was going to ask that now. Because I knew that is something that needs to be done in a quicker way, doesn't it? And it needs to be refrigerated and so on. And you're diabetic, aren't you? So I presume you'd be more. Well, I don't know how the situation is in the UK with that at the moment. Is it, are those supplies getting through okay? Given that it seems that these insulin shots seem to be made in Europe.
Yeah, most of them they're made in Sweden, with the exception of a small pig farm, I think in Shropshire. The UK doesn't produce insulin. So far as I understand, not because I've got any insider information on this, but a couple of friends, one in Scotland, the other around Carlisle, who were type 1 require insulin as I do, they have been used to going into the supermarket, where there's a pharmacy, and the other one into a pharmacy, and they've been used to essentially, they order their prescription, and then 48 hours later, they get a message saying, come and collect it. In both instances, that's not occurring for 6 to 7 days. And it's nothing to do with staff at the supermarket. What it is the supermarket just doesn't have, or the pharmacy, I should say, in the supermarket, the pharmacy doesn't have the product because it's delayed. Now, if anyone listening is type 1, you know that you start to get a bit nervous when your insulin supplies, you've got a week left, for example. So some type 1 diabetics I know have essentially tried to double up, and that's causing backlogs too. And it's not just that, it's general medicine also. So when I was talking about the next day chain, well, our healthcare relies in the UK on the next day delivery as well.
So what happens when someone can't get their insulin?
In all larger orders.
What happens if someone can't get their own insulin supply? At that point, what would they do?
Well, the consequences of not having insulin are death.
So obviously with that, but they would have to try and do something. Say you couldn't get it.
Well, you would most certainly.
What could you do? Could you get in touch with the NHS and say, I need it, I can't get it myself now, I need it, can you do something?
Yeah, so what would happen in reality if you're diabetic? Most certainly what's not going to happen is you're going to sit around and wait. You would likely get in touch with as many pharmacists, doctors, surgeries, hospitals, and explain to them, I can't get my insulin, do you have anything? And you would hope that there is a stockpile somewhere. I was just giving a more practical example of people who are trying to manage their own diabetes. This is it's an immune issue when you're needing to take insulin. And there are already delays
for that, yes.
So practically, and if you couldn't get insulin, then there's all sorts of problems. You could go into hyperglycemia. That could lead to a heart attack, stroke, some pretty severe consequences. Can lead to blind problems. It weakens the immune system anyway. So you have a compromised immune system, you're more likely to contract flus, viruses, colds, COVID, that kind of thing anyway. So there are consequences, and the other thing is, of course, the equipment for X-rays. There's a whole list. I mean, so just trying to get past the Dover. I think Immingham, where there's a lot of backlogs due to, yes, COVID, absolutely, but now the whole raft of pay. It could be the case that supply chains move to the Republic of Ireland, travel through Northern Ireland, and then over into the UK. I don't know. I don't know how this is going to work, but the one thing I can say, this is the first trade deal that's been agreed that worsens trade rather than improves.
Oh, so yes, we could ask about the deal, couldn't we? So that's how it happens. There's a lot of dropouts. I have to apologise for that. I suppose there's nothing much you can do at that end. It's just what the mobile network is like where you are, But that's how they've come to stay. That if you don't get let through, or it's taking that long to process through the port, they actually have to wait in this lorry park, and that's what happened just before Christmas. Okay, so I'll explain it. Yeah, just while James moves to, he's going to try something else now. and then they have to park and wait. But the UK government didn't actually provide any food at first. I'm not sure if they started to, for all these stranded truckers, people who are not going to be keen on coming to the UK again, perhaps after going through this experience before Christmas. Some the backlog wasn't cleared when they were allowed to travel again because of France relented on that, and some weren't able to get home for Christmas as well, and that led to some. There were some standoffs with police as well. There was some anger there as well. The local Sikh community and some local residents did help, and they provided food and all that sort of thing as well. In place of maybe the government sorting out. I think maybe Domino's gave a load of pizzas or something, but there were hundreds and hundreds of stranded truck drivers. It was hardly a festive season. It felt vaguely apocalyptic, didn't it? Well, not even vaguely, really, just before the festive season. Then if we look back through that as well, there was supposed to be 5 days of where people could meet 3 Christmas bubbles instead of the 1 that's allowed now. So for that would be used to see different friends and family, and then there were no travel restrictions. In the end, they kept that, but only kept it as Christmas Day instead of over the 23rd to the 28th or something, which Wales were going to do as well. Then it was only free to travel in Drakeford, Wales, without police attention on Christmas Day only as well. So there's been situations as well where the police have been stopping people when they've been arriving at Snowdon, for example. So it's very apocalyptic. It's very actually stopping people going in the open air, where we could say it doesn't really spread anyway. They're the same.
Yeah. So are you? Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, it was dropping out an awful lot before. Okay. So just to clarify on the Brexit thing. Trucks were, because of this, it wasn't just the speed of getting through the checkpoints. They were for a couple of days. They were completely stopped, weren't they, from even leaving the UK? So they were trapped in the UK as well, and that's why there was that massive lorry park. And then you had the situation where the government weren't even feeding them or something. So you had the local Sikh community and some local residents who helped out and gave food and so on this massive looked like the park at IKEA with about 10 times more deliveries than normal or something, but they were stuck there in their trucks, weren't they? So and now it's just going to be the speed of going through.
Well, it's the speed and the like I was saying before. I don't know if your listeners managed to catch that next day chain, which we've been used to for decades now, I suppose. The disruption to that will mean that providers in Europe might say things like, "Well, we're not bothering." At the minute, you can travel from the UK. But you can't physically travel, but COVID restrictions away, you could travel from Manchester, Carlisle to Berlin or Rome and still use your mobile phone without any additional charges. That might come to an end, and I can't see why it wouldn't, but that could come to an end. So those additional charges, begin to rack up. I mean, I don't know if anyone has ever travelled outside of the EU. I've had the fortune to do so, and you begin racking up roaming charges with just a phone call. So things like that can be really prohibitive for businesses, for people, and all of this. And the other side of this is the onslaught of workers' rights, which I know there's been a very loosely worded term around regulatory alignment and making sure that there's we can't get worse than we have today. But what we have today is appalling, and the focus isn't going to be on improving workers' rights, which, given the experience of COVID, has taught us that employers really can get away with whatever they want. There's a lot. There are more things. There are more things that than just a delay in trade. There are certain industries, car manufacturing, for example, which
Yeah.
Britain in the next 2 just open up you can just open up. We can make it ourselves. Well, yeah, if we have the R&D, if we have the workforce, we certainly do. But you would then need to design a car, make sure that it's any patents are lodged, and there are a lot more considerations than that. I mean, we've got the potential of Rolls-Royce moving, Airbus, these huge employers. So yeah, it's not just as simple as there's going to be a delay in, our eBay delivery, but actually you're then looking at the knock-on consequences in terms of employment. And please don't be fooled when the government blame it all on COVID, when it's not all on COVID. We've gone from a stable trading relationship to a brand new one on worse terms. There is an effect on, and there will be an effect on employment.
Well, that's what it is then. So what in essence is this deal then that they came up with? And it was Christmas Eve, wasn't it? Where they said we've got a deal now. So technically, it's not a no-deal Brexit, but what is it? What actually is the deal, roughly speaking?
Well, roughly speaking, because it's a bit like trying to understand the common agricultural policy. A few people have said that they do, and I think they all went insane in the end. The key points really are that there'll be no additional tariffs or taxes on goods, and there won't be any limits on the amount that can be traded either. So, okay, there's tariff-free, so there won't be any additional taxes on goods. However, there will be an introduction of checks, safety checks, custom declarations on items, and this is where I'm referring to paperwork. And look, it's bureaucracy, but there's reasons for it. I'm just going to give a summary. There are some restrictions on food products, things like poultry, animal pathogens. There's sort of proof of origin, essentially, that those restrictions, like if you're selling bacon, and this is one of my points from before, if you're selling bacon, sausage, beef, or something like that, they cannot enter the EU unless they are frozen to, I think it's -18. So if they're above -18, they're not entering the EU. So they're just some of the additional restrictions that are in place. The delays will, like I say, mean that there will most certainly be an increase in, because of the fact that there are going to be new tariffs necessarily on goods, but things like the delays in Hawley filling out forms for each consignment, for example. There's 125, 130 consignments on a lorry. Even the slight delay, the old adage that time is money, that it's going to be passed on to the customer. I can't see why business would take on the cost. There are some massive problems. Erasmus, for example, which was I wouldn't say an education, that was available to people who with limited means. It meant that they could travel to different places within the Erasmus sort of scheme network, if you will. We pulled out of, and I don't understand why. There is also, in terms of coming back to the deal, there won't be any recognition or automatic recognition of professional qualifications. So if you're a doctor, an architect, a lawyer, there's no automatic guarantee that your qualifications you received in the UK will be recognised across Europe, which, if you're working for an international legal firm, that can be quite a problem. Now, there's no indication at the minute that EU member states are going to hurry along and change qualifications, but if the UK degrades its education system, that could really be a problem. There's a loss of services, so banking, finance, accounting, things like that, lose the automatic right to access EU markets, and there were some restrictions in place there. Now, I used to work for a bank, and not a very popular industry in the UK, given what they've done to the UK economy, but like it or not, financial services account for a large part of the 80+% of our economy that is based on services, and that's really where there's going to be a large impact. In essence, what it means is, instead of having to comply with rules across the EU, businesses in finance essentially and other sectors will need to comply with the regulations for each individual country. So there's significant problems. The other issues, if we move away from that of businesses and what have you, bought for travel. So you need a visa if you stay more than 90 days within the EU. So you can't travel from, I don't know, Spain to Portugal and think, aha, I get another 90 days. That's not it. So stays more than 90 days in the EU in a 180-day period. That's important again if if your job requires you that you travel across the continent, whatever it might be. That's going to be a significant issue.
Right. So what was it before then? No limit at all?
Well, there was no real limit because it was never really enforced. So if you were spending more than, I think it was 180 or 183 days, for example, in France, you would need to declare. But it's not regularly enforced. But we're now down to 3 months if you're a overseas national, and of course, that applies to the UK as well. So if you're looking at, if you're one of the Romanians that spoke about, who were picking strawberries and all of that because the Brits couldn't be bothered, then that might restrict your ability to come over for work to do the jobs that the Brits won't do.
Oh, right,
Passports aren't valid, for example, nor there will be some arrangement, I believe, but I haven't read. I'm only about 200 pages into the deal, so God knows MPs must be able to read quickly. 24 hours, I worked out at 62 and a half pages an hour to get through the document. It's not a rate that I can read through. Oh, no. I'm, of course, being sarcastic. EHIC cards, the European Health Insurance cards, they are valid until they expire.
Oh, right.
That will be it.
So this is the health insurance thing where if you go, I think I remember the last time was Austria in 2013. You pay £15 or so, and then you're covered like the NHS here for anything that might happen. Whereas that's changing, obviously. This European health insurance card. Didn't Boris said there'd be something else to replace it, some sort of global insurance card? I guess you're going to pour some cold water over that. So what's happened? So how long is this European health card going to last then?
I believe it's called S1. But essentially, if you're in a country, we're not in the EU and you need emergency assistance, can't afford it, you'd get in touch with, travel insurance, and then after that, the embassy, to see what they can do. But the thing is with insurance, it's a bit like when you join a trade union. One of the things that trade unions do is they say you've got free legal cover. No one really gets it until they need it. And that's the point with the EHIC, well, that doesn't matter. Well, if you're going on holiday to Spain or to France or wherever, and you do have an injury, you'll figure out quickly how expensive health can be.
Yeah, well, like the US, for example. The US examples are that it's ridiculous there. Thousands for the slightest thing, or a few hundred to have some pills, or bills that can be 50,000. I don't know how some of the European countries would compare if you had to pay in Germany or France or something. However,
well, it can be costly. My medication, so I need 6 items. Now I'm in the French medical system, but it cost me before I was, and I had to claim that. I'm still waiting, claiming it back from the UK. My monthly prescription for a box of fast-acting insulin, long-lasting insulin, the big horse needle that I have to have every weekend that sort of emulates my pancreas. Some needles and testing strips. Came to just shy of €400. And the UK, you don't pay, but you don't in France. If you're diabetic, but €400 is how much? Now, that essentially is a quarter of most people's wages. Mm. So if you need access to insulin in a hurry, let's say you've gone on holiday and they're frozen or they've been left in the sun, whatever it is, you might find yourself having to pay €90 to €100 for a pack of fast-acting insulin, for example, which can really put a dent into money. Look, at the minute people aren't travelling, but I'm just saying in the future this might be something to think about. I've mentioned roaming fees for fishing. How can I put it? The UK is the UK can't ban EU fishing boats until 2026, and if it does, then the EU will start applying tariffs in response, but the UK will get a bit more of the share of fish from its own waters. If this is what Brexit was really about, then 0.1% of the economy is fishing. You can understand in Norway where this is much more important. Their deal, the Norway deal as it was there, free trade.
0.1% of the economy.
Because, up until 1970. Yeah, in the UK, but in Norway it used to be, I think in the 70s, don't ask how I know this, it was about 70% of their gross domestic products. In Norway, fishing's a huge thing. In Iceland too. So their trade deals are accustomed to trade with the EU. 0.1% of our economy is based on fishing. So there's been a huge fuss about it, and I'm not really too sure where all of that comes from, to be fair. Let's see.
Just another territorial thing, isn't it? Really, something for the tabloids to talk about. Oh, we don't get paid enough from the fish or something, or they take
I'm not sure if I could speak to a fish it would understand the concept of a border, but hey, what do I know?
It would understand the concept of death by being fished, and wouldn't understand the difference between which border it was on as a result of why it happened. So.
I do think, if you subscribe to God, he obviously has a very dark sense of humour, because look at salmon, for example. Spend all of their lives swimming around happily until they get to the waterfall. Jump as hard as they can up the waterfall. Get picked off by bears and other creatures. But yeah, I think for a salmon, the idea of being British would be very odd. You've got the other thing within this trading deal is European Court of Justice. So the UK won't have any part in the European Court of Justice, which is the highest court within the EU. So disputes between the UK and EU will be resolved in a different form of tribunal. And this was one of the Brexit's ideas, taking back control of its own laws. Now, the problem is the ECJ might still have something to say in Northern Ireland, which remains part of the customs union. So how can I put it? You've essentially got, if you're keeping up with me on what this trade deal is, what you've down the middle of the Irish Sea. But you have a situation where Northern Ireland is more aligned to the Republic of Ireland. Now, for me, that's not a bad thing because it means reunification's years, not decades, years away. However, it could spark a return of troubles, which is in no one's best interest. Carrying on with the deal, you've got security arrangements, so Europol, things like that. But essentially, we're going to the US relationship with Europol, so rules about what information shared with European countries, I think, will be done on a bit by bit basis. But it means that we don't have automatic access to European databases, nor, in fact, will we have any presence at Europol's headquarters. So this idea that Brexit means we'll be more secure, it actually means we will be less secure. And we have seen a wave of terrorism across Europe. And you would have thought it would have been a very good idea to remain within that agency, but there we go. We also there's divergence now on things like data protection. Now, the UK has relatively strong data protection legislation, but we won't have to comply any further with EU standards. So, look, we could do better, but the chances are this is going to be one big race to the bottom anyway, so I can't see it. And again, the real kick in the teeth for those students, essentially, that would help people study in other countries. Erasmus, as I've mentioned, that comes to an end, and that was yet another attack on younger people who probably don't seem to vote Tory, I guess. But perversely, Northern Ireland will be able to take part in the Erasmus scheme as part of an arrangement with the Republic of Ireland. So again, you're finding more schemes in the Northern Ireland lining with the Republic of Ireland than you would. There are. I mean, that really is as close to a summary as I can give you.
Sounds like Northern Ireland is half in the EU, isn't it? Almost get it just because of the situation with the Irish border. But you still think it could be the return of the Troubles, despite the fact they've got more arrangements, or potential return of the Troubles. Because and Scotland also said that more people voted for Remain there, so they should also retain something. But have they not retained anything like Northern Ireland?
So I just lost you there for a moment.
Yeah, I'm afraid we do still get dropouts. So whatever the situation is in France, but we'll work with it best we can. No,
So
I just said about Scotland was that
yeah,
is that they don't seem to be getting Sturgeon said that more people had voted Remain in Scotland overall, as well as and that's the situation in Northern Ireland. So do they get to retain any of EU benefits like Northern Ireland, or do they manage to, or do they, or are they just fully out as England is?
well, Scotland's sort of been chained with England now. When we voted as a UK, and we then noted that in the results that Northern Ireland voted to remain, Scotland did, and I think London. Um,
Liverpool.
Now, there are two arguments here. There's one which I don't necessarily subscribe to anymore, which is, and I'll just say I despise nationalism wherever it raises its head. However, Scotland did vote to remain by a larger percentage than Northern Ireland, and is chained essentially to, from some people's perspective, to the English and Welsh deal. Now, you can argue that they are part of the UK, and as such, they're subject to UK deals. However, I do have some sympathy that there's an arrangement for Northern Ireland, but not for Scotland. And I coming back to your question about Northern Ireland, it's not that I'm saying the Troubles are. It's not that I'm making a bet that they will. It's the risk that they could. And that risk that they could is not a price that should ever have been paid. And in Scotland too, where we see the rise of nationalism, I have to say, if I was in Scotland, I would probably vote SNP myself. And I can't see what the Westminster government is doing is driving this country to the point it will break.
So you still think that this is a risk situation for the UK breaking up? Actually, the COVID rules thing, has shown that there isn't really uniformity across the UK, because you've got Mark Drakeford and Nicola Sturgeon have made different rules that clash with the UK, and it's as if they've gained full independence in a way, because it's as if there's a hard border, which we didn't see before this crisis, but now in the same way that there isn't across England, and there's no, we're seeing entering new restrictions when you go into Wales and Scotland from England. So some people have even said that's kind of the UK having broken up in everything but name already.
I agree. I think the UK is now on borrowed time. Now, there's been other times in the UK's history where that's been true. However, I think this is the closest our generation have seen it. I mean, here's the question. These people who are saying, oh, well, you had a referendum and there we go. Well, okay, fine. But there were two referendums, one to stay in the UK, and the arrangement was that there will only be another UK if there is a significant change to the UK's future in the way that it operates, and leaving the EU is one of them. Now, there is something about me that says I don't want the country that I was born in and grew up to vanish. I really don't. But if I was in Scotland right now, I would be looking at the contempt that the Westminster government shows, and if I was in Northern Ireland, I would be doing the same. So I can't see really, in my heart of hearts, at the moment, I can't see that there is an avenue away for collapse of the UK.
So that might happen with independence bids, say. Well, another independence bid from Scotland to follow all this, and then I mean, Wales has been acting as if there is a Welsh government, a Welsh country. It's still part of the UK, and there have been different rights for people who, whether they're from England or Wales. And I suppose a good example of that would be is that when the Welsh fire break lockdown was first relaxed for a bit, to the point where Mark Drayford's Welsh Labour policy was that anyone within Wales could travel anywhere within Wales, and still excluded England from that, which basically effectively politically put a hard border there in a part of the UK that hasn't got independence. We've still got the UK, and yet there was no there were different rights for people within different parts of it. I mean, I suppose you could say that the tier restrictions are penning people in now anyway, because you're not supposed to leave a tier 4 area or enter it, but I've not seen it come to the point of hard enforcement. I mean, but I suppose I could ask you soon as what do you think? Have you got any idea of what Boris Johnson might be doing? Because at the moment we've got no news on that yet, but it's kind of worrying that life might get even more restricted.
I think for me, just on the Welsh issue, this is not going to make me popular, but I think if you're proud from Wales, you'll understand what I'm saying. Wales has never been a country. It's unified by language. And the breakup of Wales from England will be interesting, and I think it could happen. But I think then you've got, as in England, there are lots of other issues. For example, is there really one Wales, or are there two? You've got the north and you've got the south, and you've got that middling bit, which two very... And the same in England as well. I mean, if you speak to some... I'd be well up for the SNP or Plaid Cymru standing some candidates in England. I don't think they do as badly as they think. Do I have any idea about Boris Johnson? It might be the case that he's announced he's going to address the nation. So expect more of the stay in but go out, don't go out but go out, mingle, don't mingle. It'll be fluffed up nonsense. Whether we end up in a national lockdown, I have a feeling it will be a national lockdown in all but name. It'll be called something else.
So why don't they just call it that then? Because Tier 4 is like a national lockdown. It's got the same sort of rules about, you should stay in except for essential purposes, and then and also this walling into your own county or something, which hasn't been enforced particularly, but again it's it's basically a national, it's a lockdown in all but name, and such swathes of the country are under Tier 4 that it virtually is, and everywhere else is Tier 3, which is already pretty strict in terms of what can stay open. It's just a little bit less than the national lockdown. That's all. So,
well, it's Happy New Tier and to everyone. So I think that there will be a new tiering system. The tiering system isn't working at all. We've seen the problems with the lack of financial support. We've seen, there's many problems here, but I can see that there will be a return to some form of significant restriction. In fact, I was saying this to you all last year. There's going to be a spike in winter. Remember, in one instance, there could be another variant, albeit this virus is relatively stable. But I would assume that there'll be some sort of restriction. But let's not forget, it was only 3 weeks ago that Rishi Sunak was planning a winter dine out to help out system. So the problem with the predicting what the UK government's going to do is the fact that it hasn't got a clue. And seems to be massively delayed in doing whatever it should be doing. It's taken today and this weekend, in fact, the trade union movement to lead the country and explained that teachers should not be going into workplaces if they are, because those workplaces are unsafe, and that they should be using sections 44 and 100 of the Employment Rights Act. Well, so should everyone. It's time that people start looking at this. They should be refusing to go into workplaces. Most of the spread of COVID isn't people meeting up at Christmas of a day. Start having a look at the meat processing centres, factories across the UK, and see the explosion of COVID cases. Start having a look at workplaces, where there isn't adequate ventilation, where there isn't, you've got employers, not all of them bad, but most of them shrug the shoulders when safety reps and others bring to their attention serious health and safety matters. For example, do we think it's acceptable that in dealing with plutonium, workers are given doubled up marigolds to move things? If you want to find out more on that, feel free to Google search and you'll find out all you need and how much they were fined. That's the approach of employers to health and safety. By and large, shrug-shouldered and, get back to work to make some money. It's high time that people in the country take their employers to account. But I'll tell you what, if that sounds like I've got foul scorn against employers, let me tell you where I have even more direction. The situation with the British government is such that in France, trying to explain to people why it is the British public put up with this, and believe that holding politicians to account is a once in every 5-year idea. I'd be telling you not to hit the streets literally, but doing what you can, because what the government is doing is playing what they all know best to do in cabinet, which is gamble. It's casino politics coupled up with crisis politics. There's more. They make vast quantities from Brexit, and they're making vast quantities of money out of COVID also. And if people keep on quoting, for example, Sage. People keep on explaining that, Sage, they've got all of the right ideas. Well, let me tell you a little bit about the people on Sage, shall we? And let's have a look at some conflicts of interest. So I feel like I'm going on a rant, but here we go. So Sir Patrick Vallance, these people part of the Sage committee. Well, he has a £600,000 shareholding in GlaxoSmithKline. He's advising the government, of course, so no conflict of interest there. The person who in an alternative reality might have been a guard at a camp, Neil Ferguson, for example, from Imperial College, they're in the vaccine race and receiving millions of pounds from the government. Chris Whitty, $46 million from the Gates Foundation, principal investigator at various companies.
Just waiting for the audio to come up again.
Pick on a few other people who we've got. You've got Van Tam and what have you, who worked within the GlaxoSmithKline and SmithKline Beecham. Again, you've got more corruption. I'm not saying corruption, I should say conflicts of interest. And carry on going through all of this. Peter Horby, professor at Oxford, receiving millions of pounds from the government. So what we've got is a huge, massive deal with government corruption, offering money to people, and yet when it comes to things like furlough, it's 80%. When it comes to cuts to the NHS, that's fine, but can somehow magic up millions and tens of millions of pounds to their friends. I don't know what it takes for people to hit the streets, but they really should. and hold the government to account.
Well, that's
And
interesting,
so,
though, is that they are doing with anti-lockdown protests. So it's not it's not the same as hitting the streets for the usual reasons, and in some cases it's a different crowd of people. But any protest, this is something else as well. Any protest has been quashed since the national lockdown. So you've got that people shouldn't be gathering, say, in a tier 3 or 4 area, and therefore the right to protest has been assaulted. Priti Patel said that there was a change in the law over something. I'm just trying to remember what it was. It was something to do with the reasons you can stop a protesting area for reasons of whether something like there's a disturbance. If it would create a disturbance, that's a reason for stopping a protest. Whereas before that wasn't the reason. So we've got a situation now where it's virtually illegal to protest, and anyone going to it, you could be arrested, or you might not be. So this is the situation in which people would have to deal with when hitting the streets, whether it's an anti-lockdown protest or just a general anti-austerity protest.
well, the thing is with when you're talking about austerity, or whether you're talking about lockdown. Look, lockdown protests, are fair and legitimate protests.
Yes.
However, a lot of the people on those protests, I do believe, I'm certainly not saying everyone, but are COVID deniers and anti-vaxxers. I found it odd being asked a few weeks ago whether or not I'd be pro or against vaccine, and how would I know what's in it? Well, I have to take insulin. I'm not exactly sure what's in it, other than the fact that it stops me from dying.
Well, you're reasonably sure then, aren't you? Yeah, I mean, obviously, of what insulin is and how it works. The thing with vaccines is, I suppose, there's two arguments with it, which is one is that people do have adverse health reactions to even the legitimate sort of vaccines that haven't really been tested on millions of people, and then you get some people who have adverse reactions enough that they end up in either a worse situation than they would if they hadn't taken it, or could even die in some cases, and then for it to be fine for a lot of people and do the job it's supposed to do, and that seems to me a legitimate question more than even more so than the conspiracy theories are that it's an agent to deliver possibly bad health or death down the line, or to make people infertile. And these are obviously conspiracy theories. Just as with the whole idea of questioning what the pandemic is itself, whether it actually came from what they say it did, or what they think it did, to it being a deliberate plan, or being all this. So you've got so anti-vaccine has two levels to it. Therefore, when you look at it that way, legitimate concern about whether perhaps people who are more vulnerable, elderly, etc., might even become victims of vaccines potentially, because the flu vaccine is fairly dangerous to a lot of people. So that they have to modify every year. What do you think of that idea?
No, I completely agree. Vaccines, along with all medicine, are generalist and not designed for everyone's biome. For everyone's system. There are certain things that people might be allergic to. There are certain reactions that can occur. We know also of some famous vaccination problems, thalidomide, for example. However, if you can tell me the last person who contracted polio or smallpox, I'll be waiting a while.
Well, yes, because they have been very effective there. It's actually eradicated them, hasn't it? So I mean, that's the idea. Even if we entertain conspiracy theories, the idea is very good, obviously. But we're looking at a possible future where they may say you're not allowed to travel on our flights if you can't prove you have had the vaccine. You're not allowed to come to this concert anymore, or to go to this football match, and some people will not be able to take them anyway. So what's going to happen there? Are they going to have to be restricted? Are they going to have to be sort of on lockdown whilst everyone who's willing to take them isn't?
That is one of my biggest concerns, is having a system of passporting.
Yes,
you must have a passport, because let me tell you, of other passports. Having to wear a yellow.
So you just dropped out there. Having to wear a
Which
yellow
religion
is where we
you're in, or a
left it.
pink one. I'd say respectable.
But
Yeah, so just saying, having to wear a yellow star, for example, or a pink star to denote your religion or sexuality.
1930s, yes. That could be going back there in some ways. Cool.
So passporting like that should be completely rejected in all forms. As much as I might strongly disagree with people who and believe it genuinely to be irresponsible, you don't take a vaccine for just you do it for the community and for your family. But if you choose not to vaccinate, then as much as I fervently disagree with it, that is your freedom of choice.
But of course, it might not be over conspiracy theories. As I said, it might be over the idea that you're too vulnerable. For example, I have some fairly elderly relatives. What if they were to to die of complications relating to the vaccine? So should we say to them, just take it? Because you might get coronavirus, you just have to stay locked down, all that sort of thing. Because it doesn't seem like as simple as that, does it?
Well, I can really simplify it further. People should be able to make an informed choice. Now, that informed bit is the key, because an informed choice isn't what Eileen posted on Facebook. Because despite having no medical qualifications, a website that the space alien lizards are trying to take. So that's not informed choice. If you have read and understand, but just the basics of the vaccine, what's going on with it, how it's different to other normal forms of vaccination, using RNA sequencing, for example, and you come to agree with you, but that's your choice. But yeah, at least you could have an argument that it's based on what you've been informed with. My concern at the minute is, again, the destructive nature of social media has meant that because we're in echo chambers and we tend to ignore people who disagree with us, we tend to remove them or whatever from social media, and we just listen to people who agree with our perspective. What it means is, Eileen then shares a post, that it's a mind control, or it'll sterilise you, or any of the other conspiracy theories, and that's just spread then. And actually, that message spreads on social media about as quickly as the virus is spreading right now.
I suppose it's different. I suppose it also comes at an age where you're not able to trust authority as a definitive source because of how much coverage, especially in the UK, around Boris Johnson and the various lies that he told. So anything, for example, even about the lorry pox, their natural thing was to spin it and say, oh well, let's try and make it not look quite as bad as it was. Let's just say there was 150. There is about 900, but at an age where the camera doesn't lie, so it's so at a time like this, a lot of people will be feeling that they can't trust what's coming through the mainstream media because it's come from the government and they've been known to lie. Boris Johnson has lied throughout his career and has been rewarded ultimately in our society as Prime Minister. That creates an audience for listening to someone else who's got another story to tell other than the authorities and the mainstream news, and if you see what I mean.
I saw what mainstream media, government and the nonsense that was propagated around him, from being a terrorist to all sorts of things.
Jeremy Corbyn,
yes. It's a bit like today, for example. Sorry, go ahead.
It's only because it keeps dropping out, I'm afraid, what you're saying. So,
yeah.
But I think I got the idea that yes, they use that misinformation campaign against Jeremy Corbyn. Now, whether you personally believed in his politics or not, and thought it was a great vision for the United Kingdom, or it was, or if you're more right-wing minded, you might have thought that it was not sensible. it would be hard to deny that all the mistruths and the disinformation campaign that was waged against him. So, and then with someone like Boris Johnson, you can actually have things that are wrong, and it doesn't matter. So you can have, I lied to get that job. Yeah, but Jeremy Corbyn did it. Oh God, he'll ruin the country if you vote for Labour to get power with Jeremy Corbyn. So it's not a fair playing. It's not a level playing ground for information, and therefore why not give more credence to people like someone who posts on Facebook about something, through to all the various conspiracy theories as well, because that's part of the reason. Even if there may be some truth behind the Great Reset idea, even if it's come about accidentally, it's an interesting topic, but. Who knows? That it's creating a Great Reset anyway, and that lots of people are getting more wealth through
nauseating sycophancy.
Let's see, what would you say there after nauseating sycophancy? I'm afraid the French mobile phone network dropped that for you.
Yeah, I'm doing everything I can. I'm not sure what.
There's only so much you can do, Bob.
Nauseating sycophancy of Owen Jones today.
Oh, yes. Owen Jones, yes. So it'd be interesting to see what your take on him is, actually.
Yes. So, Owen Jones today, you might be aware that Julian Assange, really on a technicality to do with his mental health, the extradition to the US was denied.
Yeah, I heard about that, yeah. So that's new news today. Yes, he's been held.
Pending 14 days.
Yeah.
Yes, 14 days to appeal. So the judge today quoted The Guardian newspaper against, and lies really from The Guardian newspaper, against Mr. Assange. And whatever we feel about Assange, this isn't a case pro or against him. It was more to do with the attack on, oddly enough, freedom of expression, and to an extent, the press in which... he leaked war crimes. He leaked the crimes of a country. That was the reason he's serving time, initially at least, was that. And you then see tweets from Owen Jones today saying, "Oh, support for Assange." Well, hold on. You write for a newspaper in which evidence has been used against him. Someone posted on Twitter, I'd have to say it made me howl with laughter, where, is then how long will it be before Owen Jones writes an article saying the victory of Assange is a veneration for journalists like me. It's one of those, how can you're writing for a paper that despises the likes of Corbyn and the likes of, in a very different arena, Assange and all of that, and yet you're still writing nonsense pieces where he's gone from a supporter of Jeremy Corbyn and someone who hated Keir Starmer to now someone who likes him. There's no consistency. There's no trust in what's said, and I don't have an answer for it. But I can say that we are on our own. We're in the age of information, and it's difficult trying to find the background of particular article writers or whomever. And in the most part, we are our own article writers now on Twitter and Facebook and all of that. But what can I say? If we're at a period where people aren't going to get vaccinated anymore, there's so much distrust. How as a species are we meant to survive?
With that level of mistrust, no, I suppose not. Well, you start getting alternative. This could even be the rise of fascism, because you have people start turning to other sources for information, don't they? So that's.
I completely agree. I don't think it's the rise of fascism. I think we're already there.
So with that, so what do you think is the most fascist like of the the Boris Johnson government if we're already there?
Oh, well, it started a good few years ago with the disabled, when they took money from the disabled because the banks robbed the country. The suicides that occurred, that became a form of eugenics, in my view. Then it went into workplaces where the number of, instead of medical ill health retirement, the number of cases where people are dismissed on capability, that became a form of workplace eugenics. Then we had the rise of Farage and his ilk. Get the foreigners out. It's it's all the Muslims' fault. Case of we need to lock our borders, more money for the military. Lies left, right, and centre. Boris Johnson lied to the Queen. Not that I personally care too much about her, but how quickly we've forgotten that everything that he says is a lie. Hardly trustworthy within his own relationship, as well as a cabinet of people who, like Priti Patel's commissioned a think tank on the restoration of the death penalty. So let's bring back hanging. Now you tell me where it's just the start of fascism. We've had enabling acts using Henry VIII powers. We've had spads who can get away, just sack who they want, to do whatever. We've got a legislation going in to bypass the judiciary. We've got the judiciary called by the press as liars, enemies of the state, things like this. I mean, really, if you're a socialist, you're automatically anti-Semitic. It seems, so that when actual anti-Semitism shrug the shoulder, that politicised, they think, oh, whatever. We've got a situation where you can't openly speak about things like Palestine and the fact that the Israeli state, not the people in Israel are as much against their current government. You can see how many elections they've had. There are protests in support of Palestinians, but we can't, outside of Israel, protest anymore. It's illegal to boycott goods from Israel. We can't have an honest conversation about it. We call each other now. We want a uniformity of thought. If I came to an argument in a online conference recently where a guy was using language that was not acceptable today, but he referenced someone he worked with as coloured. And what he received was essentially, you're a fascist, you're all of this. He's not a fascist, that was the language he was used. And instead of debating and arguing points, there's an idea that we all think and do the same. There's an elite between those who have control and those who don't. We're not. This isn't the rise of fascism. We're in it. And by the way, powers will just keep ebbing away. I mean, look, at what point did the people of Britain hit the streets when they were told, when Theresa May, as with this frightening monster Priti Patel, when did they hit the streets when they were told that their human rights were going to get taken away?
Well, it's just the Human Rights Act, yes. I mean, it's usually subtle, isn't it? It's,
They have rights, or are they rights or are they temporary privileges? It's one of those things. So, that's really where I'm approaching the idea of fascism from. We've turned into nationalistic. I mean, we've got, look, in Wales, Scotland, nationalism, flag waving, at the border between England and Scotland, well, I can't repeat on air what's said, but you've got all of these messages, and it's like, oh, for God's sake, for an accident of birth, at what point did Britain become the country that allowed kids to wash up on the beaches and send gunboats to stop refugees?
I guess so. And then this whole thing with Brexit as well, to go on top of all that. So maybe as the last thing, lockdowns have to interfere with personal liberties and human rights as well. Whereas the left mainly seems, in face of the crisis, that these rights should be suspended. Just the ability to really travel around just free of of the government and police, because they are obviously now involved in personal lives, even telling you they're not allowed to have a partner and to have sex with them, for example. So it's it may well be as temporary as this is, depending on whether there's hangovers of the legislation they brought in that don't get repealed. Because apparently some things that were brought in World War II haven't been repealed, just obviously not very enforced. Is it an awkward relationship that the left has in fully supporting lockdowns with also the fact that that it's the most right-wing fascist thing to have ever happened as well? Which is the government and state are in your life.
Well, it could be the most left-wing communist thing he could do as well. I don't actually think this has anything to do with left or right, to be fair. What this is a centrist issue, if I must, which is this business of liberalism. This idea that I should be free to do what I want. Well, yes, fine, but the issue is when, in our times, we haven't faced something like this. We've spoken on other shows about the bubonic plague, Spanish flu, Russian flu, and all of this. Here's the thing: if we hadn't gone into a lockdown, this could have been much worse. The virus perhaps could have mutated in a different way. There's all sorts of could have happened stories. The fact that they haven't happened doesn't mean that what we've done hasn't prevented it. It just means that it's not happened. The relationship between lockdowns and as I say, the left, I don't think it's any different between the right-wing libertarians, left-wing socialists. I've said at the top of the show, I've been, as many people, been in an effective lockdown since January of last year for various reasons, but effectively it's been like that. Nothing to do initially with the lockdown or with the virus or anything, although ultimately that became the reason. Now, am I happy about it? Not remotely, but I'm of a very peculiar view, which is if I get this, I'm dead. My health isn't sufficient to stand it. That's not me being pessimistic. That's just the truth. So for me, even when restrictions lifted, I kept myself to myself, and by and large, with the exception of trips to the I didn't interact with them because that was my choice to do so. Unfortunately, there are the people who don't like lockdowns, and I'm grossly summarising this because it's not true for everyone, are people who believe themselves to be sensible themselves. There are also, it seems, a minority in that group who don't like it just because they don't like it and are somehow frightened that the fact that there's a virus going around, it's all part of some secret plan. Well, that's up to them. I don't think it's any political wing, though. On the left and the right, there is a belief that there should have been a lockdown. My personal view is that there should have been a very significant percent furlough with sick pay that matched, not statutory sick pay, but that matched your salary. In other words, to remove the financial incentive of having to choose between food, heating, or going into work and risking your health. That, for me, seems to be the left's issue. But in the absence of that, what else is it that people can do? At the end of the day, the reason for lockdowns is to stop people dying. The crappy why we're nearly 100,000 dead. Try and just, whatever anyone's view on lockdown, I know I'm straying from the point, but I just want you to try and put into your mind what 100,000 people looks like. You can't do it. Try it with 1,000 people.
You can think of it with imagining 10 in
just try and picture them,
and then having 10 blocks of 10 going up, another 10 blocks of going to the side, and then the squares all go up to the edge, and that's 10 by 10, so it's 100. Then you place that on top of each other with another load of blocks, and then you've got 10 of those, and that's 1,000. Then that becomes one block. So you go all the way up 10 with them to one side, and then 10 down the other side, and then put them and then square that up. It's that's the only way you can imagine in your mind lots of something.
Yeah, but what we've done is, the debate with lockdown is straying to that of civil liberties, which I understand, but it's strayed a completely way, and we're not discussing things like, well, isn't the standard of our housing pretty poor? Isn't it absolutely abhorrent that there is a large number of people who live and now have to work in their own bedroom because that's all they have, or just a single room? Why don't we have nice kept parks? Why don't we have, access to walking areas? Why don't we have the nicer things? Why don't we have that? And we've strayed into, we want the freedom to do what? At the high street that's been decimated because of online shopping. I mean, what is it that the question I have with the political side is, on the left you have we're trying to lock down to save people. On the right, we're trying not to kill our staff effectively. I'm not sure that it's political, though. I don't think that it, what you might call, right-wing fascism, I could also say, left-wing communism as well.
Yes, well, they're both quite, obviously, because it's an extreme situation. They're both quite extreme as well, but it's certainly a time where instead of letting people decide how they want to do it themselves, who they want to see and what want not risk, and you can keep your distance, or even interfering with people being able to go up a mountain in Snowdon where the risk of spreading would be fairly minimal, and people would be able to maintain social distancing there far more easily than in places like Sainsbury's or Tesco's or Asda, where obviously those places, even in the strictest lockdown, are always going to have to remain open for necessity anyway. So, but those are high risk factors because it's a building where lots of people are closer together.
Hailing from Cumbria, the issue isn't ability to go and climb Snowdon. It's when the weather changes.
Well, yes, I mean, you've got that,
whereby you've got to go and get emergency services,
which happens with some people, I guess, especially in winter. So you've got, but the rules seem incredibly draconian there. So you've got the you should only you should not even drive to take exercise. It should begin, and start at your, outside your home, sort of thing. It's like people who have not done anything wrong, because there's a pandemic, they're being treated like criminals, and it seems non-ending. You've got the situation where one lockdown started in March. It went on for 12 weeks, but it wasn't long enough for most people on the left. And then a second one, and now a possible third one. Instead of just letting things take their course, possibly because actually treating people in this way, and then the mental health crisis that follows that, the increase in suicides, and also the collapse of services, not being able to get treatment for other things other than COVID in hospitals, when people's operations have been put back. So we've got these. There are all these questions about it, aren't there? Is it really the right way to do it? And it seems to not be winning. It seems to not be working. It still seems to be going up anyway. So people are fatigued from doing it, and that's why the streets are busier. So putting on further.
I'm tired of lockdown. I'm tired of the little things, the spontaneous things like going for a pint after work. I'm tired of it. But I have to put that against. Okay, well, it's not really. Look, like I say, if I get COVID, that's it. Me done.
Yes.
But if I'm not, and I spread it to, I don't know, an elderly relative, a disabled family, I'm not sure I could live with the consequences that on that one day that I decided to go, sod it, I managed to wipe out a few people.
Which you might not ever know about anyway, I suppose. That's one thing about, because it's supposedly it does transmit whilst people are asymptomatic, which has been questioned by a couple of sources, but it lies in wait and takes a couple of weeks before you see any symptoms, and that's why. But also, some people are simply asymptomatic whatsoever, which means you wouldn't know if you had it and had no problems yourself. And spread it around. It's kind of like the perfect virus, even from the point of a conspiracy theory. If they were to design one to control people, this would be a great one, because it only takes out certain people under certain circumstances. Seems to know things about when to strike exactly. Of course, that's the way that the viruses work. And some people even question: are there viruses? Is everything the way that they say it is? But we don't know. So this is kind of, it's it's a natural defense system of the body. It triggers that. It's
we don't even know the viral load, for example. So there are many questions, certainly. But I suppose we're all learning at the same time about this, aren't we?
Well, yes. I mean, they've found out how it can spread much more easily when it's unventilated, and it takes time to spread in viral load. So passing someone on the street probably wouldn't do it. In most outdoor situations, it wouldn't. How long it lingers on surfaces, but there's also the fact that, again, bringing up the idea of trying to stop people going to Snowdonia might be ridiculously petty, because it might not survive on gateposts and things, in the open elements, as it would in a warmer environment where it's likely to stay on the plastic for 24 hours plus. So there's all these things, but it's shown how authoritarian authority can be when it was more in the background, and in the past. They will literally try to stop you travelling around somewhere, or who you can see or what you can do. To that extent, and it's not, and it's something that we don't know how long it's going to go on for as well. So that's
no, but I can see that certainly it's in summertime, coronaviruses do begin to abate.
So we're going to wait for this summer, obviously, especially if it isn't down to the idea of a great reset, for example. So the idea of a great reset could just be the what we've already seen from a socialist angle as well, which is that 1% of people own the wealth, and they can even profit from such crises, as we've seen in World War II and World War, and when smaller businesses and people with less suffer the most, and that's what we're seeing, isn't it?
Yes, there's a hell of a lot of money to be made in in crises, and it's regrettable. Or what this virus has shown is that there are so many people who are vulnerable, whether it's economically or socially, and that instead of addressing those issues, what we've done is become so individualistic. The dream of Margaret Thatcher for that point, or Ronald Reagan, depending upon where you are, has become so embedded within our society that this should really be the time that we plough more money into health services, that and not just physical health, but mental health services too. Yes. This is what we should be doing.
And putting the pay in place so that people can, not go to work, and but you're all advocating for 100% furlough rather than 80% furlough. I suppose the other one with Wales, which is what was I going to say there? Especially as I haven't eaten today at all, so this is the thing, is that we're talking about this great reset idea, of the idea that the bigger businesses and the most wealthy of the world are going to actually benefit from the situation, and it's going to be disproportionately harsh on the smaller businesses and ordinary people. Well, one example of that would be the ban on non-essential items that was held during that Welsh 5-break lockdown. It meant the small businesses had to close, but it also gave the trade to Amazon. So that's what you're looking at when they ask shops to close across the country. More and more things will be ordered online, Brexit aside, and that. And the dominance there has been the likes of Amazon rather than small business. So that means, and again, the few shops that are left are the big supermarkets. So they've got even more dominance at a time like this. So that's another. That's why it's possibly called a transfer of wealth as well, because it's hit small businesses so hard.
Here's the thing: in economic terms, though, the right. We're already seeing that in the US antitrust laws against Google, Facebook, Amazon, where they're saying you become a monopoly. Look, another way of looking at it, though, is it's exposed the vulnerability to for example, Amazon, people ordering toilet paper and masks and what have you on Amazon, they couldn't sustain the orders. They were all coming from places like China and what have you. If you ultimately, the answer is, if you want the high street and you want the local shop to prosper, go and shop there.
Yes, and that includes, but you can do that normally, couldn't you? But of course, under lockdown restrictions, more and more shops are asked to close unless it's in the lighter tier restriction. So you can't actually support the local high street so much at that point, except for maybe local shops that sell food that are still allowed to open. So, and then for products, it's increasingly online. We're getting put into maybe what's known as a technocracy, where everything is done from the box, from little screens inside your house or flat, which are the smallest places in Europe, by the way, in Britain. So that has been said to help the spread of COVID in this country, is that people are living not in enough bigger space. So you're staying in there, very bad for mental health, ordering things only from big companies, shopping only from big companies, and watching the mainstream media, I suppose, on top of the, but increasingly not, again, because of the situation, socialising and actually living in the real world, which is something that it's sort of accelerated a direction we were moving in anyway. To live in a technocracy, as it's dubbed.
Well, the reason this technocracy exists is because we allow it. I was on a chat to a few friends. It's October, November. Who were saying, "Go Whitehaven, for example. It's just cheap shops and all of that, and there's nothing there." And the Tory MP was saying how great it is. Nothing's changed. yeah, and I said, yeah, but if you are going to shop at places like Amazon, it's not just the shopping; it's the way they treat the staff. That puts a huge downward pressures on your rights. Firstly, at work, and secondly, away from that, it takes away other jobs from the high street. If you want your high street to have shops, you've got to shop there. Now, stop obsessing about. I mean, it's more nuanced than this. So when I say, for example, you've destroyed the high street to save £1 on a topic on a product, sorry. That you're trying to save money is because you haven't had a decent pay for God knows how long. You look at the shops and the continent. Well, actually, they're not doing that badly. Now, COVID has had a massive effect on them, but the idea of going out to a restaurant still there. The idea of good luck trying to get a takeaway. Where I live, it just won't happen.
Okay. Well, we're going to have to wrap up there, I think. We've actually tried to dissect what Brexit actually means, and you've done a very good job on doing that, and what the deal actually is. And of course, it's like slipping bad news out, isn't it, slightly, because Christmas Eve is not a time for deep political analysis. Oh, let's have a look through this deal. Oh no, I've got to go and get some last-minute presents, actually. I'll look at that in the new year. It's one of those. It's one of those sorts of things. And as you said, fishing rights seems to have been one of the supposedly bonus areas of it. But you said it only accounts for 0.1% of our economy, unlike about 70% or such similar high figures for Sweden and Iceland. And yet it seems that the territorial aspect seems to have been, when looking at some of the other benefits of Brexit, it's difficult to find out what they are exactly. Northern Ireland's retained it, some just because of the border with Ireland. It's almost like they're half in the EU, really, but everywhere else is not. So we've had a look through that, and also what it actually meant to be a lorry driver, and how I had to wait there. And who came to their aid when they had nothing to eat at all for several days? Quite a lot of people never got back for Christmas either. They're not going to want to really come and work and deliver to the UK again after that experience, I'm sure. So, just like, do you fancy popping to Dover to take these things into Britain for us? Nah, I'll do Calais. I'll do Stockholm, but no, don't. Not Dover, not anymore. So yeah,
Little Britain. But thank you for having me on again. And yes, apologies for the signal issues. I'm not sure what the problem was.
No, it's just and I've just been testing out this new mixer thing as well. So, but that side of it worked very well. So, okay, well, hope things are not too difficult for you in France. But it might be, you at least don't have to deal with Brexit.
Oh, but I do.
Oh yeah, you said you wanted a computer.
British in France.
Oh, I suppose you do. Yes, I suppose you do. You said you can get a computer locally. I would have thought maybe that. Well, even if the best ones are made in Britain, which I'm sure they are anyway. So.
Well, exactly.
Okay, close out there.